FPS games need no introduction. They are a staple of the industry. On all of my subscribers' lives, you played at least 3 of them before. In order to design the perfect FPS, obviously we need to play and analyze the ones that came before. Classics like Half-Life and Counter-Strike, all the way down to modern shooters. Now, FPS is a very peculiar genre, because it itself houses a bunch of other subgenres. You have tactical shooters, hero shooters, narrative-driven shooters, and this. Whatever the fuck this is. So, designing the blueprint for the perfect FPS is going to be challenging, let alone making it. To kick us off, Half-Life! Having revolutionized narrative first-person shooters, it clearly did something right? One of the things you notice when playing this game is that your immersion is never really broken. You're in control from start to finish, and when you're trying to tell a story, immersion is very important. And Gordon being a mute protagonist also helps immersion greatly, allowing you, the player, to put yourself in his shoes, feeling like you're actually the protagonist. Valve really loved this type of thing so much, they did it again with Portal, and it also worked. So we figured it out, right? The key to first-person storytelling is total immersion by never stripping control from the player. BioShock is also a great narrative FPS. Even though it uses cutscenes, it uses them sparingly. Add to that the silent protagonist of the first game, and you start to see a pattern. Tactical shooters often require good game sense, teamwork, and a great deal of communication, as well as near-perfect balance between the maps and weapons and mechanics and whatnot. Off the top of my head, the closest game I can think of that has all of this is Counter-Strike. Valorant came close since it pretty much stole CS's whole flow, bar for bar, but the hero aspect of the game really throws off that balance we just talked about, because it introduces something we like to call randomness. Take a look at this clip from a Valorant tournament match.
And they actually send the orbital strike to try to take him down, but he's already made his exit. Sprays through Ching! Oh, the util combo! Pagechill's into Showstopper, comes up with 2. Devi gets calm as well. Ethan trading 1 back. As Ching set up into the corner, swings back through, finds 1, the up from Demon 1. Go reinforce A.
Are we being dead ass right now?
No.
I'm not gonna say this means the game takes less skill to be good at, because that's kind of a dumb thing to say. But you can't deny the amount of random bullshit this causes, making it, in my opinion at least, a less competitive game. I know Valve just went 3 for 3, but I promise you I'm not a Valve glazer. Wait a minute. So you can count to 3! When you hear movement FPS, what's the first game that comes to mind? Is it Titanfall 2? Ultra Kill? Or maybe Quake? See, I recently played Titanfall for the very first time. I played a little bit of the campaign, but mostly the multiplayer. Most of what I was doing in this game is just running using the hook thingy, and it was awesome! I'm gonna go off script here for a bit, but damn I fucking love this game. The feeling of total freedom you get from perfectly chaining slides, wall jumps, and the hook thingy is one of the greatest pleasures in gaming. Which is why movement FPS games are very, very cool. Killing your momentum is one of the things that shouldn't even remotely cross your mind if you're trying to make a movement FPS. Unless of course it's due to the player's incompetence. In that case, it's actually a welcome feature. We've coasted through those last 3 subgenres quite easily, wouldn't you say? The following games we're gonna cover aren't quite as simple. This is where game design gets tricky. Don't mind me, I went on vacation in the middle of making this thing. Simulation FPS games, for instance, have a lot of nuance. For a simulation game to be perfect, it just has to best mimic reality, right? Now, I myself aren't really the biggest fan of simulation games, so a lot of my points here will be purely subjective. For a lot of us, Tarkov is the first and maybe one of the only games that come to mind when we think of simulation or sim-adjacent FPS games. Every system in this game reinforces risk. Ballistics are granular, armor and ammo management are key gameplay components. Sound is often your primary source of information, yada yada yada, you already heard this before. The tension of the game mainly comes from permanent loss. Dying wipes pretty much everything you've done and earned up until that point, which turns every small decision into high stakes calls. Now, if you're into this type of game, Tarkov is amazing. I myself am a big fan of the slow pace and brutal cold threat of getting slimed out by 1 or 2 bullets without the due diligence of processing what just happened. Where Tarkov stumbles in my opinion though is the small things, the unclear user experience and the grind heavy progression sometimes undermine the purity of its immersion. When it works though, it delivers something few shooters do. Genuine fear that gives certain horror games a run for their money. And for those arguing that video games should be fun and simulation games or sim-adjacent games aren't fun because they mimic reality too closely, there's people who enjoy this type of game. There's genuine fun to be had here. The next best thing is the Call of Duties and the Battlefields. What do you even call this genre of games? I don't really want to class them as narrative FPS because they're more concentrated cinematic experiences. Though if you're anything like me, we mostly remember these games for their multiplayer. Black Ops 2 to this day is still top 3 experiences I've had on a game growing up. The countless hours of fun with my siblings and friends on these games is something of great value to me, which breaks my heart all the more when I see how they're treating these games nowadays. DICE, on the other hand, seem to be doing something right with Battlefield 6. I was actually there to play the beta, and it was the most fun I've had on Battlefield since Battlefield 3. It legit felt like I was in a movie. It was so peak. For the longest time, it's what Battlefield was known for. Sharing this huge map with a bunch of people fighting at once, on the ground, in the air. So dynamic and fun, and it's just so Battlefield. I especially remember when Levolution was introduced. That was it for me. I thought Battlefield was the coolest thing to play, especially with friends. Not that you would know. And I feel like Battlefield 6 managed to tap into that again. The cinematic experience is there, and it's done in such a way it only serves to enhance the gameplay, not the opposite. I think I've covered enough for one video. Let's get to work, baby. So, after looking at all these subgenres, one thing is clear. There is no such thing as a perfect FPS. At least, not one that tries to do everything at once. But if we're talking about a blueprint, something you could realistically build toward, there are patterns that a designer can pick up on and follow. First things first, immersion through consistency. Whether it's Half-Life never taking control away from you, Tarkov committing fully to consequence, or Battlefield selling you the fantasy of being one soldier in a massive conflict. The games that do work, do so because they never break the rules they set for themselves because it's convenient. The moment a game welcomes you into its world, it has to commit to your shared relationship by valuing the time you sacrifice to play the game, and respecting the fact that you have a functioning brain and can use it to think. Second, player agency over spectacle. This is starting to feel like a presentation. Titanfall and Ultra Kill don't feel good because they look cool, although it is part of it. They feel good because you are doing the cool thing and have total control over it. Same goes for sandbox shooters like Far Cry or even immersive sim adjacent games. The player needs to feel like the source of the action. Cinematic spectacles should preferably be a direct consequence of the choices the player makes through gameplay as opposed to forced tacked on content. 3. Clarity of purpose. Every great FPS knows what it wants from the player. Tactical FPS expects you to be intentional and aware, whether that be of your surroundings, or your teammates, or your advantages and disadvantages. Movement shooters want flow and momentum and minimal error. Simulation games want patience and discipline. Horror FPS want vulnerability, and down the list it goes. Ideally, you should pick a fantasy and go all in on it, man. 4th, meaningful friction. Not everything should be smooth. Reloads, movement limits, death penalties, resource scarcity. These are tools to enrich the experience as opposed to serving as a limit for the sake of serving as a limit. Games like Resident Evil 7 do a great job of showing how limitations can actually create fear through vulnerability, thus making the game better at what it's trying to be. A horror game, even tactical shooters rely on friction to slow players down and force thinking, making the game less about aim and more about actual tactical prowess. The perfect FPS should ideally use friction to enhance its intent. 5th, and this one's personally the most important, memories matter more than mechanics. I don't remember Call of Duty because it revolutionized first-person shooters. I remember it because of all the fun memories I had playing it with my friends and siblings. Same goes for Battlefield. The hours I sank into this game wasn't because it was the closest thing we had to a perfect game or anything. It was because my friends were there. In my opinion, the best FPS game, or the best game in general, is one that allows the player to create worthwhile memories, whether it be online or through couch play or maybe even single player, sharing the controller or just sharing the screen. And sometimes for the game to do that, it needs to have some imperfection in the first place. From what I've come to find, the perfect FPS contains these 5 things: a clear identity, consistent rules, player-driven action, intentional friction, and last but not least, room for memorable moments. Not realism, not graphics, not even balance necessarily, just a game that knows exactly what it wants to be, does that better than everyone else. Honestly, that's already insanely hard, but hey, that's game design.